The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Well, it's that time of the week again. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Clear Signal. Great to have you with us. Clearsignal.com.au, of course, is the website. You can find everything you need to know about us there, including playable editions. If you just go to the editions tab, if you've missed a show and you'd like to catch up, you can find everything you need right there. You can listen to shows and also find out about ways to contact us if you'd like to do that. Always great to get some feedback from you. Clearsignal.com.au. Well, ahead this week, a bit later in the show, we're going to be looking at the issue of Australia's Defence Forces, the topic of Australia's Defence Forces, in fact, and talk about why it is that Defence is having a lot of trouble at the moment recruiting people. We're going to be joined by my partner in crime here at Southern Skies Media and also a defence journalist, Grant McHerron, and we're going to have a bit of a chat about that and, of course, some of the new technology that's pretty cool that's going into defence right now. But first up, before we talk about that rather serious subject, well, who doesn't like a holiday? I mean, I know I do. In fact, you know what? With summer coming on here soon, I think I could use one, and I'm sure you could too. But how do we do it? There's so many ways that we can book a holiday these days online. A lot of people can do it without having to use a travel agent. But I know travel agents are sometimes seen as perhaps old hat. Or really, are they? I don't know that they are. I think there's a real wealth of knowledge there that we can tap into with them, and I thought we might explore that now. Irene Jones is the director of Travel Globe, a well-known travel agent here in Melbourne and, in fact, right around Australia, and she joins us on the line now. G'day, Irene. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Steve. How are you going?
I'm wonderful, and, I love talking about travel because, like many people, I love to do it. I thought we might start by talking about the concept of travel agents because, of course, in this connected world, in this era of the internet that we all love so much, a lot of people like to do it themselves, but has that been a challenge, I think, number one, for travel agents more recently? And number two, I guess, why should people not do that? Why should they use a travel agent instead? What's the advantage of it?
Look, I would say in the last couple of years, it's actually changed. I would say it was more of a challenge for agents pre-COVID. It was definitely, much easier to go online and do a point-to-point ticket. So flying, Melbourne to Sydney, very easy, hop on the airline's website and get it booked in. I think what happened after COVID is a couple of things. The first one is that a lot of people waited a really long time to either get their refunds back, get their air flights rescheduled after an event like that, but also the understanding that your agent can really help you in ways that the internet can't. One, their information and attention to detail is really important to what they do. So not only will they keep you abreast of what are the current visa conditions, they'll also make sure that your passport has 6 months validity, which most countries require you to do. They also, especially in terms of flying to Europe or Asia, where you want to do, more than just your flights, where it's accommodation and you need car hire and you need touring, it's much easier to get someone to put that together for you so that nothing is missed. A lot of times when we do our independent travel, what we do is we jump online, we find a great airfare, we book it in, not even going to an agent and thinking, one, they might be able to get this cheaper for me. And secondly, are there any great conditions on this? Can I have a free stop in Singapore? Some airlines, if there's not a good connection time, will give you free accommodation for the night. So can I add a stop on? Especially, around the world or wanting to do more than one stop. I think that actually what's happened in travel agencies especially is that the community is starting to come back and value them as someone with experience. Most travel agents are very well travelled, especially the ones at Travel Globe are very well travelled. And we really pride ourselves on them giving an experience that you can't get online. When something goes wrong, you don't want a machine, you want a person to help fix it. And I think that's the most important thing in terms of, trusting that travel agent again.
I think just as an aside too, that must be one of the coolest things about being a travel agent. I mean, you guys get to travel everywhere. I can't imagine why there's not more people beating down your door for a job.
Well, it's also a lot of pressure for agents, right? I mean, we're in charge of your itinerary, and there is that thing where when you do have a travel agent, sometimes what clients tend to do is take their hands off the wheel completely. A travel agent is there to be someone that will help guide you and get the trip that you want, but you still have to take some responsibility and ownership as a passenger as well, right? So it's about having a really great relationship with your agent and being able to work together to create an incredible trip. But so the agent's there to advise you, but ultimately things like applying for an ESTA if you're traveling to America, we'll advise you to do that. If you don't do it, if you get denied, the client also has to, take responsibility and make sure that they're doing those things as well. So, it's a really good, I think it's great. And I think that especially today with so much going on in the world, you want someone that's been there or that knows about a place so that they can give you the advice, So, for example, if you're traveling to a zone that potentially is not safe to be going to right now, you would need a travel agent to make sure that they can help make that a seamless place for you to go.
I think too, it's not only the flight side of things. I think a lot of people go, well, I can get a great deal on a flight, but you've also got to stay somewhere when you go overseas. And now you're looking at, and I won't single out, you look at your Expedias of the world or places like that. You've got to source all that hotels and accommodations yourself, which, and look, I'll be honest, I've done that caper myself a few times, but it's such a hassle.
Well, it's also, I think that with a lot of online booking engines, and look, they're great. And I think they're all got a place everywhere. I also think that, the more of us in this industry, the better, because it gives customers more options, which I think is more important, right? But, you think about those places and some of those, again, I'm not going to mention the names, but some of those instant booking programs that you do get online, some places have had, you can read the reports online, but some of them you turn up and there's no hotel there or there's no house there. So you also just want to make sure you're secure and covered. If you go there and you've booked it with a travel agent and the hotel doesn't exist, that agent will reaccommodate you immediately and make sure that you are in a good position to enjoy your holiday. So there's that. But the thing that they also miss too is there's a lot of booking terms and conditions. The cheaper it is, the more restrictive it is too. So you might book it in and then go, but actually I stuffed up and my flight arrives in a day later and you haven't done this with an agent. Well, now you've actually got no accommodation and you've stuffed up the dates and you need someone to fix it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have found that over the years with the concept of budget airlines as they've come online, and people say, well, I didn't get a great seat or I didn't get customer service. Well, as the saying goes, you get what you pay for, don't you? And if you're going to fly a budget airline, for example, or use a budget travel site, well, okay, I think people need to take a bit of responsibility and accept that, well, maybe it's probably not going to be the best option for me.
Yeah, and that's why travel agents are really good too, because you might have a budget of, say, whatever is okay for your family, right? So it might be $3,000, but you want a luxury experience. Well, where can you get that for a week and give your family a luxury experience? So you might be going online and looking at places that are, super expensive or super cheap, but you don't really know about it because you're looking at the price point. Going to an agent means that you can go and have that experience. So they'll tell you straight up that budget will fit, that budget won't fit, that destination is great for families, that isn't. So I think that it's really useful for them to be able to use that. It's not only that, but, even if you make an insurance claim or if you've had something go wrong, your agent will help you with that. So I think that's really important. These guys really work hard to provide a great service, and going online, you really cut them out of being able to give you an experience that you're going to enjoy. And don't get me wrong, I get it. It's really easy to book a Melbourne to Sydney and you might be staying the night with your mum. Go ahead, do that. That's great. But I'm talking about when you really need a trip that you want to remember, or you have a trip that's special to you, or you have a trip that you want to go really well, I would definitely engage with an agent.
Now, of course, people naturally think we're going to focus on overseas travel, and we will do that. But, as you mentioned, we're coming out, a few years the other side of the COVID times now.
Mm-hmm.
People are getting out and wanting to travel. Of course, there are plenty of great domestic options as well when you're traveling around Australia. We broadcast this show to many parts of Australia. So are you seeing a trend of people sort of reaching out and branching out to support local tourism, staying here in Australia, or are you seeing people wanting to venture overseas?
We really have. I mean, since COVID, to be really honest, since COVID, travel has gone nuts. I think it was that feeling of, not having the option to travel being given back to us, let us all go out there and go traveling straight away, right? We just wanted to get on a plane and get out of here.
That was
us. I was on the first plane that left Melbourne. to the US. I was like, I'm out of here.
Absolutely.
But domestically, it's going really well. So, your key things, especially coming up to Christmas or Easter, those school holiday periods, like obviously we all know Queensland's a ripper, right? You get great weather, fantastic for families, but then go beyond. The Great Barrier Reef is one of the most beautiful tourist destinations in the world. Hamilton Island, Hayman, great family escapes, different budgets as well where you can go. Perth is also brilliant to
Perth
go
is
for
beautiful.
a family.
Yeah.
So gorgeous. So Australia does really well. The thing is with the domestic market, it all comes down to budget, right? And in some occasions, it is cheaper to actually go overseas. So I think the community really wants to get behind and support Australian tourism 100%. But we also are starting to see some hotels really come to the party with giving some great deals for people to go away and get that done. So domestic tourism is looking really good at the moment, especially up in the tropical North Queensland, your WAs. It's really going well.
I suppose anecdotally, do you see a lot of us frozen Melbourneites, heading north for the winter? I know.
I see us frozen Melbourneites heading north just for getting out of Melbourne.
Yes. Yes, I should say that, but I get in trouble when I say stuff like that.
Oh, I don't mind saying it. Look, I love Melbourne. I'm a Melbourne girl myself, but anytime I can get out to some sunshine, I'll take it.
Okay, let's have a look at some overseas trips. My wife and I have been looking, for example, at a couple of options, going to Europe or going to the United States. Now, I've got I lived in the United States for a couple of years, so we normally, every time we look at going overseas, it ends up being there. But looking at prices at the moment, it's expensive to travel to the United States at the moment. You can get really good deals going to Europe. I'm really surprised at that. Why is that?
So there's a couple of things in play here, right? So obviously airlines and their airline fuel surcharges go up and change. So depending on where they're sourcing their fuel from, it can change the carriers' taxes and fuel levies that they put on the flight, right? So that does change. With Europe, the airfares have dropped, but taxes have gone up. So in terms of when I say taxes, I mean your airline fuel surcharges, those things go up, right? But what's really interesting, if you look at the state of travel, an international airfare in the 1970s was around $2,000 to $2,500. It still is about $2,000 to $2,500.
Yeah.
Travel hasn't actually, so it feels like it's more expensive because we're so used to seeing some low-cost carriers play in that market. So, for example, we're getting more competition now in Australia, which is better for us to travel to the US, right? So, for example, United, Delta have all come into play and they're doing direct flights now every day. But what you'll find is that with the US carriers, they are very dictated by what's going on and what airline prices are out there. What you find with Europe is that you get a lot more airlines traveling into there, so they have more dynamic pricing, right? So you have more offers coming out. So, like your Singapore Airlines, Emirates, Etihad, Qatar, they all bring out sale fares all the time. And so it feels cheaper. But in actual comparison to what airline prices were in the 70s, they haven't really changed.
Interestingly, too, you mentioned some of the Middle Eastern carriers there. I guess that's a factor with Europe, too, because there is a lot of competition coming from, you can go through a place like Doha or Dubai these days, which probably back in the 70s wasn't so much an option, was it?
It wasn't an option. And people really weren't flying with Middle Eastern carriers then. It wasn't until around the 90s, 2000s that they really came to force. And they're fantastic. Like, they've got such a great product, and flying in and out is very safe. So I know that would be a concern for people right now. There's stuff going on in that part of the world. I even just flew back from Europe recently, and I have to say, I was staring at that map the whole time. When are we getting over this bit? But, your airline will only fly over very safe areas. They go out of their way to obviously avoid war zones and things like that. So it is also safer than it has ever been to travel as well. And I think that's something after COVID, people really wanted to make sure that they had that connection to being able to travel again. But with so much that's going on in the world, they wanted to feel safe. And now is a really good time for that.
And is it also a case of supply and demand? Like, are you seeing a greater percentage of people wanting to travel to North America versus Europe? Is that would be a factor too, I would assume?
It depends what season, right? So when you get to our winter season, the Europe season is huge. So think from between May to September, that's your most expensive time to travel to Europe. It's also the best time because it's summer, and I know it's summer in the US as well, but we tend to go to the US from around February through to April, May. So it's really interesting. That's just the way we travel in Australia. That tends to be our high peaks. So it's really interesting that the way we travel, and it really has made an impact, I think.
The clear signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal. My special guest this week talking travel, of course, is Irene Jones from Travel Globe. Irene, we were talking about travelling to the United States over there. One of the things I wanted to touch on too is, although with inflation this may have changed, yes, it's cheaper to go to Europe, but one of the things I'm weighing up right now is once you're there, is it more expensive to get around versus the equation being the other way around in the US? It's usually pretty cheap over there.
It really is. So that is the big difference, right? So airfares, yes, you might think it's a lot cheaper to go into Europe at the moment, but depending on the standard of accommodation, they are smaller rooms, they are more expensive, they are incredible, but they are going to definitely be a price point. America is so big, right? And they just have so many different suppliers for accommodation and tours and car hire that they are cheaper when it comes to what we call your land arrangements, right? So your air arrangements, yes, might be cheaper to get there, but what will your land arrangements be? Obviously, this depends on what city in the world you're going to. You know, your prices in New York are going to be very different to your prices in Nebraska. You know, so it really depends on the area you're going to. If you want to spend a few days in New Orleans, it's going to cost you a lot less than going and spending a few days in Beverly Hills. So it's about also knowing which area you're going to. Now, with Europe, the difference is that if you're going to the main European cities, which generally we do, you will find a higher price point for your accommodation depending on your standards. So there are absolutely some options if you're happy with that 3-4 star range, absolutely, but they will tend to be more expensive than Europe, absolutely. The other thing to consider too is that a lot of European cities now have started charging tourist tax. So you need to be aware of that. And as of next year, there is an ESTA required for some European cities. So an electronic visa. Sorry, I shouldn't have said ESTA. An electronic visa required for Europe.
Yeah, so visas they're kind of a thing of the past these days. I find most places you go now, as you say, you've got to do a check-in or an ESTA equivalent before you leave. But that's something that very important that people need to think about.
Absolutely. And also I honestly recommend that you do that around the same time as you book your flights, because if you are denied a visa, you are not going to be able necessarily to get a refund on your flights depending on what kind of restrictive airfare you've chosen.
Okay, now we've talked about Europe and North America, but something that I didn't do until I was in my 50s, and I live in this part of the world, you got to wonder why, but I'd never travelled to Asia up until the last few years, but I've done a couple of Asian destinations now, Thailand, and we've been to Singapore a few times. What a marvellous place Singapore is. You must get a lot of people wanting to go there. Singapore
is one of our number one Asian cities. Not only that, but a lot of airlines transit through Singapore as well. So you get a lot of the customers flying from Australia that will stop in Singapore. Beautiful, beautiful place, Singapore. It's just got so much to do. It's a very westernized Asian country, which is probably why Australians tend to gravitate towards it. Thailand's incredible. So is Vietnam. Vietnam is one of the most beautiful places, really untapped for tourism. So many people. But Vietnam has some incredible places to go see and visit, and is relatively cheap. For us to go to those beautiful Asian countries is relatively cheap lodging, cheap to eat. So you do have that experience. So if you get a good airfare, it's a good holiday to have. Again, what I would say if you're going to Asia is check on the weather. Is it rainy season? What's going on during that time? What events are on, so that you're having a really good time and that you've planned around your family and your friends or whatever you want to do when you're traveling.
Yeah, I tell you what, and we went to Thailand, and interestingly, that one of the things I found as a contrast, talking about being westernized, when we were in Bangkok, I think we probably assumed that it was going to be similar to Singapore, but there was a definite language barrier there and a very different culture, absolutely.
Yeah, very much. And look, and ditto for Hong Kong as well. Hong Kong is an amazing city. I love visiting, but it's very different in different areas. You know, you can go down Peking Cantong Road and it's quite western, beautiful shopping centres and a great, area to visit and the lakes nearby. But then, you can go down another street and it's very different from our Western culture, and it's a bit of a culture shock. But I think that's the beauty of travelling, getting into the culture, tasting different foods, getting to meet different communities. I think now more than ever, we need to be part of a global community.
And do you find, for example, if we talked about travelling to Europe, but obviously you've got to hub through somewhere, obviously, to get there, and at least until Project Sunrise, I suppose, really gets off the ground.
Well, Qantas does do the Perth to London, but depending on their route at the moment.
Actually, I have a few Qantas pilot friends that fly that route, and I don't think I'd want to spend that. I love airplanes. I don't think I'd want to spend that long on one, though, without
17 and a half hours?
Yes, no, thank you. I don't
it's
think
only
I'd want
2 more hours than LA. I think as Australians, we're so used to knowing we're going to be on a plane for a really long time.
Do you know, Irene, I've done that trip across the Pacific to LA so many times in my life, and I keep telling people the older I get, the longer it seems to get.
Especially the way back. I find that on the way there, it's a 15-hour flight, but usually if you get, a good flight, you can get there in about 13 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
The way back, you never can. It's always 14 and something.
But thinking of hubs, I mean, is that a good strategy too? If you're going to go to Europe from Australia, well, you're going to if you plan to stop in somewhere like Hong Kong or Singapore,
Absolutely.
a good stopover and spend a few days there, I suppose that'd be a good strategy.
Absolutely. And, there's some that you can even get 2 stops if you're really clever. So, there's some airlines, so like Finnair, there's also Turkish Airlines, just an example. Turkish Airlines will usually get you a stop in Asia and then one in Istanbul to your European capital. Lufthansa, again, an Asian stop going past a European capital. So a really good way to get like 2 stops in there for free. So it's about, again, working with an agent to be really smart about what are the places you want to see. So you said before, why not go? I'm trying to decide whether to go to America or Europe. Well, this year I did both. It was such an easy flight. I ended up going from New York into London. It was 7 hours. Now for us to fly 7 hours to get to London from anywhere is amazing. So, you could do both. You can go from LA to New York and then fly over.
Oh, gee whiz. I need your job, I think. I think I'm in the wrong line of work.
No, it is fun.
What about frequent flyer schemes? I've got I see a number of YouTubers around that have all sorts of great. In fact, I'm chasing one for the show now. I hope I can get him on. But frequent flyer schemes, they seem to me, Irene, to be made deliberately confusing. I think like most people, I have points at Qantas, I have points at Virgin, I even have points at Singapore Airlines, I think, but I don't know how to make them work.
Okay, so if you want to make your frequent flyers work for you, the first one is try to keep to one carrier group. So, for example, Star Alliance, they've got Singapore Airlines, United Airlines, Virgin. So you've got all of those kind of linked. Actually, I've got to check Virgin because I think that's just changed recently.
Yeah,
Apologies.
They have changed, yeah.
They have changed that. Apologies. But, you really have to sit with one airline group. The other thing is depending on how you want to use them, right? So you've got to look at the best time to redeem the points and then even consider like pooling all your family points together to get your points faster. Obviously, there's credit cards you can get for more points, but I don't recommend taking on debt to get something that's not free. A point's worth that for a client is something that you need to think about, right? So evaluate like the annual fees and do all that. But the biggest thing is people use them to redeem flights. I actually use mine to upgrade.
Yes, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, so I use mine to upgrade. I just find that they go further. So, you've got to make sure that you buy and this is, again, if you go online, you don't necessarily know that the cheap airfare you're buying is not allowed to be upgraded with points. So you do have to pick a specific type of economy ticket to be able to use your points to upgrade. And then, of course, it is always, and this is always the airline's discretion whether they issue the upgrades or not.
Yeah. I've got long legs and I'm tall and I'm not exactly small. So and I'm getting old and grumpy now, Irene. So I don't really want to be squashed into economy class. So, I'm very fortunate I can afford to fly business most of the time now, but I've got all these points accumulating. And I just find sometimes I don't know whether to do, as you say, whether to book a flight as economy and take the gamble that I might be able to get an upgrade, or whether I just go bang and I'll upgrade. I suppose that would really depend on which airline you choose.
It depends on the airline. And also, I think that there's no reason not to go speak to an agent anyway. If you're ahead of time, your agent can help you do that and also then book in the rest of your accommodation for the things that you need to do. But the biggest thing with points is you have to be like really far ahead. Like even with Qantas Frequent Flyers, for example, they've got a great product really, but with this new Classic Plus, it almost makes it impossible to get a good deal on your points. They have made it harder to redeem. So I would say that it's really good to book ahead. You can still get classic rewards if you book far enough out and you really research. There's some great sites that will actually come out and tell you, like, for example, Qantas has just released this many point seats available on this date. And so you can go and look that way. But if you want to plan your trip and you can't get them, I just say book and go and do the trip that you want to do. You can't rely on points to get you there all the time. And you will have some experts. I'm glad you're trying to get that guy on because I think that would be fantastic to get more tips on.
And I suppose the other thing you mentioned there too is airline alliances. Star Alliance, of course, is one. OneWorld is another.
Yep, OneWorld's another. Emirates have Skywoods. All airlines, Air New Zealand, like they've all got a frequent flyer program pretty much that you can be a part of. It is better to stick with an alliance one though, because then you will get points, depending on the ticket you've booked, of course, to travel.
And I suppose the other thing you mentioned there is different types of fares. I think people get confused about fare classes, and I think that's something that travel agents are uniquely qualified to really guide people through.
Yeah, and I think it's important, and I'm just going to make this really basic and quite generic, but the reality is your economy class, right, is all exactly the same, but it is priced into different price sections. There's about 9 or 10, 11 price sections. So you're always going to get the cheapest ones come out. And I think this is important for when you are booking travel. Some people leave it to last minute thinking, oh, a good airfare is going to come out or a sale's going to come out. I would say good luck getting that sale for the dates you want if it's in peak season. I would say book ahead of time, because the cheapest seats are released first on economy, and then you have different price brackets. So you could be sitting next to someone that paid $1,000, $2,000 more than you did, depending on when you booked, depending on what seat has been released, even though they're all in economy.
Yes, it really can be confusing. I tell you what, I think all of this really comes down to why it's really beneficial for people to use a travel agent. And I know with my overseas trip coming up next year, I think that's exactly what I'll be doing. Irene, it's been great to have you on the show. Tell us where people can find you online.
Please come to www.travelglobe.com.au, but also just come and check out what we do. And also, if you want to engage with an agent, you can do that there. We've got fantastic agents all over the country, and they are willing and ready to help.
Irene Jones, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, mate. Have a great day.
Coming up after the break, we're going to be taking a look at the state of Australia's Defence Forces with Defence journalist Grant McHerron.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
Look, let's be honest, Sarah, we've all got to eat.
That we do, Kevin. Food is such a big part of life, isn't it? And talking about food can lead us to all sorts of places and all sorts of people.
Yep. And every week on the Food Bites podcast, we catch up with someone who might be a TV celebrity, a high-profile sports star, a politician, could be anyone.
Yeah.
And we talk to them about food, their kitchen skills, or, sometimes lack of, life and love.
And Kevin, every week there's the Friday food poll.
Oh, yes. Now, that is Food Bites with Sarah Patterson and me, Kevin Hillier. You can find us wherever you find your favourite podcast, and, of course, every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock on the Ace Radio Network.
You're listening to The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Welcome back to the second half hour, folks. Well, despite the current economic climate, I think we've all become fairly used to living in largely peaceful and pretty prosperous times, particularly across recent decades. And it's times that, frankly, can often lead to a bit of complacency when it comes to the issue of national defence. And in doing so, I think it tends to fall off the political radar a bit as we look to focus on other things in our lives. But it does remain vitally important, and potentially even more so in coming years. But the Australian Defence Force is struggling at the moment to attract recruits in the numbers required, and it's something that I think really needs to be brought more prominently into the national discussion and pretty urgently addressed. And to be honest, if there's ever been an exciting time to be in our military, you've got to say it's right now with so much really amazing technology coming on stream. So let's have a bit of a chat about some of those issues. Grant McHerron is a defence journalist and, of course, the host of the Australian Defence Magazine podcast. And, of course, together he and I run a nice little media business called Southern Skies Media. And we welcome him to the show. Grant, you and I have been doing this sort of caper now for about 16 years. I think this might be the first time that one of us, though, has interviewed the other. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks, mate. And I totally agree. This is definitely a first. Since 2009, we've never interviewed the other one.
Now, we're going to have to try and resist the urge to talk about aeroplanes, which is the normal shtick that you and I get into. But we do a lot of other things too. And, of course, you with the ADM podcast, and, of course, you do have a role in the defence industry yourself outside of that. So you're well, enmeshed in all of this subject material. And I thought it might be something interesting to talk about because, we live in interesting times. In fact, as we record this today, there's been changes in the political system across the world with the election of the new American president. So we don't know how that might change things. But be that as it may, defence is a very important facet for any country. And, I think there has been times where it may have been neglected a little. Politicians use it as a plaything sometimes, but one of the things we're looking at the moment is that defence is finding it a little bit hard to get people here in Australia to join. So I thought we might just touch on that as a starting topic and just see where it goes.
That sounds great, mate, because, you've just alluded to what's generally referred to as the peace dividend, which with the falling of the Berlin Wall and the USSR devolving into Russia and separate states and so on, it was seen that the Cold War was over. We didn't have to put as much into defense industry and so on. Our situation was fine, and we've been able to reap that dividend, as they call it, by putting money into other things. But the world, it is changing. And money that goes into defense, you look at it and think that could go into so many other things. But when the people around you are starting to pick up clubs and starting to express and be a bit belligerent and moving into areas that they've been told they shouldn't, but they still do anyhow, you really need to start thinking, I should look after myself as well as being able to assist those who rely on us. And thus spending on defense comes up.
And you and I recently attended the Land Forces Conference here in Melbourne, and of course, many listeners will know that was quite controversial, and there was a lot of protesters around. And I think I said on radio at the time, I appeared on a Melbourne radio station here, nobody likes war, nobody wants it. But as you say, the sad reality is that we don't live in a perfect world, and therefore it's important not only to maintain defence spending and maintain a robust defence force, but it's also really important to get people to be interested in signing up.
It certainly is. And that's something that as a defence journalist I work on along with my colleagues, and that you and I do when we're doing our aviation shows. We try and promote the fascinating world that is being in defence. There's a lot of negative press about the defence veteran suicides and things like that, but there's a lot of changes happening in defence, and the old guard is having to change, you might say. It's been happening over the last 10 years, but it's really getting accelerated. Defence are well behind on the numbers of people they need to, manning their current platforms is proving difficult. They're doing a lot to try and make themselves a better place to be. Yes, you do have to dance to their tune. There is a very different world when you're working with defense, but the payback is you get very well trained, you get some great skills, and by the time you're out, you are reasonably in demand, not just in defense industry, but in industry in general. A lot of people have gone on to some very great careers outside of defense based on all the skills they got and the training that they had while they were in.
I would assume the defence itself is doing, or the Defence Department, people around that industry are doing a lot of analysis trying to work out how they can attract more, particularly young people. I mean, that's obviously the pipeline they need to access. There must be a lot of analysis going into why are people not wanting to join? Is there so many other different options around perhaps that you and I in our younger days didn't have?
There certainly is that. And there's also not a lot of great stories getting out. They need to get more stories out, which is something we keep telling defense media and defense ministry. You've got to get the stories out. But you've also got the situation that right now there is so much opportunity, and a lot of young people are saying, I'll go into construction, I'll go into the mines, I'll be a FIFO worker. And they see that as a less arduous lifestyle. And it can be very difficult with the posting cycle inside defense if you're trying to raise a family. I know a number of people who have done it, and they've managed to make things happen and it's worked out, but there's been a number of people who haven't managed it, both in defense and in FIFO and other industries. It does happen if you're being posted around the place.
It's interesting too, isn't it? Because skill-wise, I mean, it's a great place to go in and attain skills and get training that's not going to cost you, well, it's really not going to cost you anything if you go down that path. You can have a career in the military learning particular skills in such a really wide range of different disciplines. And then you can take that, you get a little bit older, you maybe, get out and come back to Civvy Street, and now you can take those skills and apply them in civilian life. So there are advantages there that perhaps young people don't think of, and maybe that's a message that defence needs to get better at getting out.
Absolutely. And there's also the whole reservist situation. Either you've been in full-time and then you've dropped down to reserve, or there's a number of people who just go straight to reservist. And being in full-time or as a reservist, you're getting tax-free pay, you're getting housing benefits, you're getting medical. There's all sorts of things that you're getting that you're not having to pay for if you're out in the real world. And as the steam comes out of the economy a bit and as unemployment goes up, there's almost a one-to-one relation. It's not quite, but it's quite fascinating to watch unemployment versus recruiting for defence. It does go up when unemployment goes up.
Now, you and I, of course, look at the aviation side of this a lot in the work that we do, but, I mean, it wouldn't matter whether it's Army, Navy or Air Force. I mean, the level of technology that's now coming in, and in fact the role that technology is playing in our defence industry and the sort of equipment that's being deployed. I mean, it's fascinating. Particularly for older guys like us, we can look back and say this is sort of the stuff that might have been considered science fiction. But if you're a young person looking to get into defence right now, there's some really cool technology that you can engage with. And I guess we might, what will we start with, Grant? We might start with the Navy because, there's interesting stuff going on there.
Oh, there certainly is, mate. They've got a new platforms that they're bringing on, which is the Hunter-class frigate. That's going to be a little way away. Of course, everyone knows about the AUKUS nuclear submarines. But we currently have Collins-class submarines and a number of the Collins-class submarines and the Hobart guided missile destroyers and a number of other amazing platforms. Plus, there's also these large optionally crewed vessels they're talking about, but a lot of work is going on with autonomous surface and undersurface vessels. You've got the Ghost Shark from Anduril. You've got Osseous, a local Australian company, who have their Blue Bottle unmanned vessel that uses wave power, solar power, and so on. And it's got a persistent surveillance reconnaissance capability out on the waters. Every year they do the Autonomous Warrior exercise, just recently held off Jervis Bay. Absolutely incredible. And so good to see what's coming along. And we're talking sovereign Australian capability, not just international.
And expanding that concept more broadly to the Army and to the Air Force, you talk about remote systems of various different types. We see the Air Force using that, of course, with their Loyal Wingman program. But one of the things I noticed that was actually really fascinating at the Land Forces conference was looking at the ground forces aspect of that, and even the remote vehicles, that's starting to find its way in there, which I think that's probably a good message to get out to people too. Like, that has the potential to make, heaven forbid we get into a battlefield scenario, but if we did, that actually makes it a lot safer potentially for the warfighter. You can send remote vehicles way out in advance and maybe they can take a bit of the brunt. So it's amazing technology.
Certainly is, mate. And Army is busy transitioning to the Integrator unmanned aerial vehicle that they're using for monitoring battlefields and so on. They're also taking on the Huntsman, which is a long-range strike, self-propelled howitzer. Speaking of long-range strike, they're taking on all new missiles like the HIMARS you may have heard of. They've got the new battle tank. They're preparing to bring on Apache. They're bringing on more Black Hawks that they've just started transitioning to. Next year, they've got Exercise Talisman Sabre, which is massive. That'll be around July, August. And that's every 2 years. That's huge up in the Shoalwater Bay area. And all sorts of things going on, transition of Army itself. There's a lot to consider. And, of course, Air Force has got some amazing platforms now and a few more coming along.
When we talk about the three branches of the service, I think another interesting facet these days is the way they are being networked together to work as a more of a singular platform, more than perhaps was the case 20 or 30 years ago. So again, technology, and I keep talking about technology here, Grant, because I think that's a good message we need to get out to the young folk is if you want to work with high-tech stuff, this is really a place to do it. I tell you what, it makes me wish I was 30 years younger and I could have a crack at it now.
Well, you're certainly getting to field a lot of amazing stuff. And I've just recently written a feature article for Australian Defence Magazine on electronic warfare, because the modern day battlefield, it relies so much on technology. You've got to have your ability to protect that, to maintain your communications despite what the others are doing. And you just have to look at what's happening in Ukraine and the Middle East to see how that's applying. So yeah, some absolutely amazing new technologies. It's the forefront and cutting edge of all this great new equipment, IT supporting it, IT running it. There's just so much going on.
The Clear Signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal. My special guest this week is my partner in crime in media, Grant McHerron, and we're talking this week in his role as a defence journalist, because it's something that he does quite often as a contributor to Australian Defence Magazine and also the host of their podcast, a very well-produced podcast, I might say, Grant.
I can't imagine where that's coming from. No, it is a brilliantly produced podcast. You wouldn't have anything to do with it, would you?
No, not much at all, not much at all. Anyway, I don't wish to boast. Anyhow, Grant, we're discussing issues around defence just briefly in this segment today. We hear a lot in the media and around news media from time to time. Politicians will talk about well, recently we've had one called the Defence Strategic Review, for example, and we hear about white papers. Can you tell our audience, what are these things that people talk about? What is a white paper? I think people hear that and it just glosses over. Like, most of us wouldn't know what that is.
Yeah, a lot of the white paper, green paper, and all those sorts of things come also from the colour of the cover on the document. It's not they're all printed on white or green pages, but that's the general baseline cover, the general baseline colour of the cover. But look, a white paper in the Westminster-style government that we're part of, it's a document that's used to outline proposed policy or legislation that they want to get in. So a white paper really says this is what we want to do. We know what we want to do and this is it. And it lays it out there. Whereas a green paper, for example, if you're doing a green paper, that's really designed to stimulate discussion, obtain feedback from key stakeholders, that kind of thing. So you might lead with a green paper, follow up with a white paper when you know what you're trying to do. Then the Defence Strategic Review, that document sets the agenda for reform to defence's posture. Many years ago, like 10, 15 years ago, we're going to have 10 years of notification. We're going to have lots of notification before things get really hot in the geopolitical situation. Well, about 6 years ago, everyone started to realize that 10 years was gone. And it was now, it was happening. And in fact, many people refer to the current geopolitical situation as being very similar to the 1930s. History doesn't really repeat, but it certainly echoes. And we're seeing echoes of a lot of that with different groups, but postures, things that are going on. You could get too hawkish about it, but you really should be aware of it. And so the Defence Strategic Review acknowledges what's happening, and it sets the agenda for reform for defence. And it also included a partner document called the Integrated Investment Program, which specifies the areas of spending over the next sort of 10 years. And it also shows what's committed and what's not. It's all very well for a government to say, we're going to spend $10 billion on this, but we've committed $130 million. There's a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, so basically saying, on one hand, we've got a big wish list of things we'd like, but of course, if it's one thing that's a truism in defence when you're acquiring any type of hardware, it's really expensive. So I suppose, there's a lot of competing interest there, isn't there? And not every branch of every service is going to be happy with the outcome. And I suppose the other side of that too is our political cycle federally here in Australia is every 3 years. So potentially if you have a change of government, you have a change of agenda, a change of priority, and that can also affect the way a lot of this spending goes, depending on who's in power at the time.
Correct. And another factor that's coming in that we're seeing around the world over the last 2 years or so, it's being referred to as the small, the smart, and the many. And it's not putting billions of dollars into a single big platform or things like that. It's putting millions of dollars into multiple different products. Either they have a same common backbone but different modules on them, or they are completely separate, because if they find some way of defeating your common backbone, then everything's out. But if you've got 5 different approaches, then they've got to have 5 different ways of blocking what you're trying to do. And so we're seeing that with the uncrewed vessels that the Ukrainians are using. They've effectively taken out the Russian Navy in their area. They've all had to move over to the eastern side of the sea and get the heck out of Crimea because they made it too difficult. And that was without big battleships or anything. That was with small, smart, and many. You're seeing it with drones in the air as well, and the first-person view drones that are being used to deliver munitions or sight and target weapons, all this kind of stuff that's going on. So there is also this change that's happening, and we're waiting to see. The Defence Strategic Review was looking at big platforms, long-term, takes forever to build, all that kind of stuff, costs a lot. But meanwhile, they're trying to put money also into new technologies, as we were talking about before, and to shorten the procurement cycle. That's another big part that we have to do.
I suppose you talk there, of course, Grant, of an over-reliance on technology sometimes. And, in the end, you're often talking about kinetics. And sometimes I guess you can just use the KISS theory, isn't it? They keep it simple, stupid, and sometimes that can trump that. That's really what you're talking about there. But when you're speaking about technology, another real facet that's really playing an increasingly huge role in defence is the cyber technology side of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I suppose that's really a discipline now that all branches of our defence force are really into.
Well, it's not just all branches of our Defence Force. They're into it. They're all across it. The Australian Signals Directorate is driving a large part of it. But every single company out there, even a small business like ours, we have to be aware of what's going on. Two-factor authentication, preferably with a key, password device on your phone or something like that you have in your presence, as opposed to receiving a text message. A text message as your second factor of authentication is great, but everything you can do, be aware. Look out for phishing. Look out where they pretend to be something and try and get your details, the phone calls, the emails. It's on the rise. It's happening. And a lot of it is state-based, either directly state-based operators from another country or groups that are funded or supported by a state-based operator where they turn a blind eye. So long as you folks don't hack our stuff, go wild with our enemies, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I suppose turning it back to the idea of recruiting, I mean, we have a lot of young people now that are really into this sort of stuff. There is some, you and I recently have interviewed some people, for example, from one of the big universities here in Melbourne on a separate subject, but there are a lot of smart kids coming out of our universities, and I think that's a real opportunity there for them to, people to engage in that form of what really is national defence.
It certainly is, mate, and we're seeing a lot of it. And also a lot of neurodivergent folks are getting incredible jobs working in IT and the counter cyber criminal world, where they're going up and they're protecting systems. It's quite fascinating. We have a person we know who runs teams of neurodivergent people in IT security and so on, and they're doing great work. So if you've got an affinity for IT and an interest in this, by all means, jump all over it. It's the way of the future. Like I was saying about electronic warfare, the cyberspace efforts, they're critical as well.
Well, Grant, one of the other factors about defence for any nation is, of course, strategic alliances. And you alluded before to the AUKUS alliance, which is the latest one that's been talked about a lot. I think a lot of people focus on that just being about the announcement of nuclear submarines, which is going to be a long time before we acquire those platforms. I think it's personally, I think it's a good move that we are at least looking in that direction. But I think it's important to note with something like AUKUS, it's not just about submarines.
Certainly isn't, mate. Pillar one is, of course, the submarines. And yes, it is good that we're looking that way. I think we could have been a little smarter about some of the money we've thrown around with no strings attached. But it needs to be assessed and looked at and planned for and built towards. And it's huge. It's our equivalent of a moonshot, that pillar one. But pillar two, not a lot of people are talking about that one, but it's very important. It's not getting a lot of common knowledge out in the world. And it's your long-range strike. It's building missiles and artillery and so on here in Australia. And we're trying to get to the point where we can actually build everything, things under license. They may not be our smarts, so to speak, but we need to be able to assemble the ammunition, be it missiles, shells, all that kind of stuff that we need and our allies are going to need in this area, because that's one of the first things that gets blocked during a war is your supply lines. And if you're waiting for parts from overseas, it's very important you can do this yourself. Also, the investigations into like hypersonics, we're at one of the world leaders in that. Many people don't know it, but there's a lot of research that's been going on, high-fire, sci-fi, things like that, all about hypersonic weapons and aircraft and things like that, which is where you're above Mach 5 times the speed of sound. We're doing a lot of work with that. There's also a lot of work being done in quantum and, of course, a lot of work in electronic warfare and all those areas. They're all under Pillar 2, all the new stuff and the amazing stuff and the technology side of things. And that deserves a lot of attention. It's very important.
And that never seems to get the attention, as you say, it deserves. And you look at something like a nuclear submarine, you think, well, that's a huge, big ticket item. And yes, a very, very expensive item. But, it's like you say, it's about building local manufacturing, having sovereign capability here, where we can do this stuff here. As you say, supply lines, Australia is a long way from anywhere else, even those allies within the AUKUS alliance, as they're proposing it. One of the advantages, I suppose, is that it's going to have potentially a lot of American troops here in case we need them, and perhaps British support depending on the situation.
Certainly. And one of the big things that we've got a problem with in our supply lines is most of our fuel.
Fuel, yes.
Yes, to support our own domestic work, let alone our military, comes from overseas. And we don't have huge reserves here. Some of our counted reserves are actually on tankers coming in, or even over in the United States still. It's quite fascinating, and most of our oil products come in from Singapore. So one little blockade and oops.
Yep, all the more reason to have a submarine fleet to just perhaps make any potential enemy hopefully think twice about blockading any of that.
Submarine fleet certainly helps. There are some who think that, yes, nuclear power is great, but we probably also need to look at some diesel-powered local ones for what they call the littoral area, i.e. the areas just to the north of Australia, which are very important sea lanes. But either way, submarines are very important.
I suppose thinking of submarines, Grant, we talk about the Collins class. Those boats are getting old now. They are, they did have a bit of a bad rap, and I know they had their problems in the early days, but they are a very capable platform these days.
They certainly are. They've developed through the problems and become one of the more advanced submarines of their time. And yeah, very important, amazing, getting a life of type extension to help keep them going until the nuclear subs come along. But again, let's roll back to what I was talking about before. We still have to think about the small, the smart, and the many. And these underwater and surface autonomous vessels are really showing the way there of what could be done. And it comes back to, they call it man-unmanned teaming. And you have a crew in an aircraft or a crew in a submarine or a surface vessel, or even, as you were talking about the autonomous land vehicles, a crew in a land vehicle, and they're controlling multiple autonomous vehicles on the ground, underwater, on the surface, in the air, that are augmenting what they can do. And as you said before, going into harm's way while they stay back and are a little more safe than they would be otherwise. And I think that's going to be a big part of where we are in the next 5 years.
Well, I'll tell you what, Grant, this stuff just fascinates me, as you well know, and we could talk about it for hours, but time is against us. But if you want to go into this in more detail, folks, I would highly recommend you check out australiandefence.com.au and, of course, the excellently produced podcast which Grant hosts along with Ewan Levick, and they drill down into these topics in far greater detail, and it's really, really interesting. In the meantime, Grant, we've got some air shows to plan for, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Lots of air shows, lots of fun podcasts to produce, so we'd better get back to it.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on and having a chat today, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. It's been odd, but great to be on the other side.
It certainly is. Folks, that's everything we have for you on this week's edition of The Clear Signal. Thanks to Irene Jones for coming on and having a great chat about travel. You know what? I think I need a holiday after all of that. And thanks also to Grant McHerron for joining us today. We'll be back next week with more fun right here on The Clear Signal. Until then, folks, stay safe, have fun, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.
Southern Skies Media.